All right, great guys. Appreciate you joining me this afternoon for the East Coast there. I guess you West Coasters are still in the morning. As you probably heard, we're going to be recording this webinar and we'll pass around. So if you have to jump off early, don't feel like you'll miss anything. You'll get a recording of this webinar in an email. And of course, we also run a YouTube channel where I post recordings of all my webinars and different topics. So you'll hear me reference that a little bit today in our discussion. So be aware that that's there. You'll also get a link to that in the emails. But looks like a sellout crowd today. It's kind of cool. So a lot of new people coming in. I know we get a lot of return attendees that come and listen to these talks. So I appreciate everyone joining and all the new folks coming in. For those that don't know me, my name is Brian Hahn. I'm a consultant at MTradecraft. And in MTradecraft, we mostly work with RIAs, hedge funds, broker-dealers, family offices, and we essentially help them secure their networks and build their compliance documents. We don't sell any IT, install IT, anything of that nature. We act as a pure consultant, which I think is important to know before we dive into our discussion today. Of course, today we're going to be talking about, and maybe this is why you joined, we got a lot of new people, is to discuss 20649. And that's going to be the new cybersecurity regulations coming down the pipeline here shortly that are going to affect RIAs. So today we're going to talk about some of the operational and compliance challenges that this regulation is going to bring. And then I'll discuss some of the solutions, that we're putting in place and some of the conversations we're having with our clients to help meet these requirements. So, the idea today, I'm going to show you a few things. I'm going to name drop on some software that I use that, you guys can use as well. Again, we don't sell any of these services. So it's just what I've found that works best for me in doing this type of work. So first half of my career was spent in the compliance and operations side of the business, both with RIAs and hedge funds, running trading desks, doing compliance, doing cybersecurity, doing a lot of different tasks. And then for the past 10 years, I've been doing nothing but cybersecurity consulting. So a little over 400 audits going through these different networks. So again, important to note, because we're going to talk about solutions that I think it really fit a wide variety of firms, so these are ideas that I deploy to a wide variety of clients and work pretty well. So we've had a few conversations on 20649 so far. What's different now is that we actually saw 20649 pop up on the SEC's agenda. So as you can see, we're looking at a final action now of October 2023, so just around the corner. So it's real, it's heading down the pipeline. It's on the agenda now. And so it's something, I think we've definitely seen them ramp up in these type of requests, them being the SEC. We've seen them ramp up their requests for cybersecurity documentation recently. And of course, I think when this hits, it'll become even more widespread in their examinations. So we'll talk about all that today. If you need a quick brief run 20649, I've referenced these two sheets a couple of times, but it's the total regulations a little over 200 pages. Lucky for us, the SEC breaks it down into a 2-pager. In that 2-pager, it's really going to cover kind of 4 topics, one being the cybersecurity risk management rules. So, what exactly are the rules going to dictate that you need to be doing? So we'll talk about that today. Reporting of significant cyber incidences. So there's going to be some regulatory documents that you're going to be required to file now. We'll kind of briefly cover that. Disclosure of cybersecurity risk and incidents. So we're actually going to have a public disclosure of how we're running our cybersecurity programs. And of course, record keeping, with compliance, having accurate records is everything. So that's going to be a part of this regulation that we'll discuss today. So stepping back for a second, I always like to, kind of talk about where we are. From a long time, we've gone from a period of where the SEC, through OC would release some some public statements about what they found, cybersecurity best practices, and suggestions on how they suggest firms work. To now we're moving to a period of actual regulation where 20649, instead of saying, hey, you're not following best practices, they can come back and say, hey, you're not following Rule 20649. So, what's interesting, and if you've seen our other webinars, we talk about, I personally found what the SEC put out publicly to be just not accurate. What they would say publicly didn't reflect what they were actually requesting documentation wise when they're coming in and issuing these examination information requests. So if you haven't already, we have a document on the homepage, so mtradecraft.net. It's called Securing Compliance, and this is a document you can download. There's two parts in the document. The first part is going to be a full examination information request letter that the SEC's recently sent one of our clients, and it's chock full of cybersecurity related requests. So you can see that document in its whole. And then the second part is just where I've copied and pasted over all of these different documents that I've seen throughout the years. I think, for me, this is a great document to have because we reference it here when I'm building the final documentations for my clients. Of course, because we want our clients to be able to give something to the regulators, in a format that we know they're going to request. So, we've been looking at these, the back end and what they're coming, what they were requesting in these examinations for a long time. And the 20649 regulations are really moving and aligning that and bringing to the front light so that they're very open about what advisors are going to need. So that's been an interesting transition to watch through the years, but definitely highly recommend that Securing Compliance document, giving it a download and going through it if you haven't already. So let's talk about at a really wide level here, what documents is 20649 going to require? So of course, there's going to need to be a policies and procedures manual. We've done an entire, I think hour and 15-minute webinar where we've broken down the policies and procedures manual, looked at the table of contents, and really dove in on this topic. So I'm not going to cover it in too much detail here today, but if that's something you want to look at, you can definitely find that video on our YouTube channel. Now we're going to have regulatory disclosure of incidences. So if you get hacked, we're now going to have a Form ADV-C that you have to file with the SEC. So we'll talk about that. Disclosures of risk to clients, the Form ADV Part 2A, where you're actually going to have a written narrative of your cybersecurity policies and procedures. So as a cybersecurity guy, I'm not a big fan of this particular part of the regulation, and I'll discuss why a little bit later on. And of course, proper cyber record keeping. So they're going to require you to keep ongoing records of your logs, your reports, your audits, your pen tests, and requires annual review of these documents and supporting documentation. So there's also been language in that ruling about having a board of directors that is dedicated to cybersecurity. So one thing the SEC is going to want to see is, that your executive team, that the firm owners, the ones actually running the firm, are actually involved in cybersecurity. It's not something that they just turned over to IT or hired an outside MSP and thought that they could wipe their hands. We're actually going to need to see board directors signing off on these annual reviews. And then, of course, cybersecurity awareness training. So this is something the SEC has requested for a long time. They want to see evidence where your employees are going through training to understand how to identify a phishing email or a malicious URL or application sent to them or a download from an email. They want to see testing of all these things, that you're putting your employees through the training and also testing and making sure that they understand their cybersecurity obligations. So we have a product called Fieldcraft. It's super easy. It takes about 10 minutes to set up. And if you have less than 10 employees, we even have a free version that you can log in and get that training completed. So definitely take advantage of that if you don't have the training in place. There's also a couple other documents that I think are always important to mention. And, one that I'm big on with my clients is having an employee technology usage agreement. So, for my client, their executive team, when someone is hired, is going to give, and also annually, as we review this annually. So at a new hire and on an annual basis, they're giving copies of the cybersecurity policies and procedures manual and having the employee sign off that they have read it, and they are also issuing an employee technology usage agreement. So the policies and procedures manual defines how the firm is going to operate at the cybersecurity level, and the employee usage agreement is an agreement between the firm and the employee to understand how the employee is allowed to use the firm's infrastructure. So, can they bring their own cell phones? What apps can they use? Everything should be stipulated in the employee technology usage agreement. So, of course, that opens up a whole nother can of worms of bring your own device, mobile devices, which probably is another webinar we should hold shortly to catch up on. And then for us, with our clients, one of the biggest things that, we like to sell is that idea that, when you do get an audit notice or an examination information request list, it's easy to produce these reports that the SEC is talking about. So for us, that means having, kind of what we call a cybersecurity operations center, a SOC, where we can have searchable, reportable database repositories, cybersecurity logs and audits, reports, the different records, the training, everything that we're doing, having that in one location. So that we can easily show the regulators, hey, we're on top of everything, and two, we can produce that documentation that we know they're going to request. So, just quickly talking about the policies and procedures manual, even within the P&P manual, 20649 is going to stipulate a few things that need to be outlined. One is doing your risk and threat assessment. So that's including your vendors. So understanding what risk and what threats do your vendors, do outside hackers, do your employees, understanding all of these threats and putting them, into a report, which of course, that's one of the big reports that we do for clients, helping them put together. Individual employee security and user access rights. So making sure accountants don't have access to the trading platform and making sure traders don't have access to the accounting platform. The SEC wants to see where you have a program in place and where you're documenting that program. Your information protection protocols and procedures, right? So, where do you have 2FA installed? Are you using single sign-on? Talk about, what are you doing? Having a written description, who's in charge of what systems, actually putting names on who's running these information protection systems, intrusion protection systems, intrusion detection systems. Everything should be outlined in the policies and procedures manual. And also what you're doing about your ongoing cybersecurity and threat vulnerability management. So we know there's going to be vulnerabilities that come up. How are we finding them? And more importantly, how are we remediating them? In course, involving the necessary parties, involving executives, and making sure that we can document that. So, and of course, response and recovery. If a breach does happen, how are we going to respond and how can we recover? So these are all things that should be outlined in that P&P manual. So this is the part that I really don't like. We're going to have a written narrative, and I believe it's the part 2A that might have changed. I believe in the original wording, it was going to go in the part 2A. Maybe they're calling it part 2B. See, I'm really not that familiar, but in the brochure, in the written disclosures, we're going to need a narrative description of the cyber program now. So, in this report, we're looking at perceived threats and discussing past events. So, let me back up a little bit. And, when we engage with a client, one of the first reports that we put together is that risk and threat assessment report. And the entire idea of that report is we're coming to the client and saying, hey, we're acting like we don't know them. We're saying, this is what your firm looks like to a hacker. This is what they see. This is where your email is. This is where your website is. These are the things they can attack. You have an employee using remote desktop. whatever it may be, that's what we're looking for. And when we build that report, we're using what we call OSINT, open source intelligence. So we're going through all of your Form ADV filings with the SEC, for instance, right? So everything you file with the SEC, they just dump out on the back end because of the Freedom of Information Act. So, for me as a consultant, when I'm building these risk and threat assessment reports, I'm now going to add a section where I can say, hey, I downloaded your Form ADV Part 2A and read about your cybersecurity program. I figured out you wrote down what your firewalls were, how you're protecting them, so on and so forth. So, from an outside perspective, this is all very useful information to a hacker. They want to know what systems you're running. They want to know what policies and procedures you have in place because it helps them better develop an attack. So, 20649 went through a couple different, and maybe it's normal, it didn't look normal to me, but where the SEC opened the comment period and then closed it down, and then they reopened the comment period. And if you go through and read through these comments, a lot of them are negative. A lot of them are worried about this type of stuff. And I can tell you it's real. It is a real threat if we are disclosing our cybersecurity secrets publicly for the people who might want to attack us to have. So that's coming your way. I'm not a big fan of it. Of course, I don't have any say so. And that's something we unfortunately have to help our clients with. Mandatory incident reporting, same thing. So the original wording, I believe, was that you have to report within 24 hours. That's unheard of. That's never, you can't efficiently and effectively figure out a hack and post a response within 24 hours. So I think they're giving you a gracious 48 hours now, which is still a little short. So, it'll be interesting to see what the final reporting period is for that final language. I think right now we can kind of go off the same language with the public companies. But anyway, that may change. So any incident, a successful phishing attack, a website takeover, a denial of service attack, a ransomware, any of these attacks you experience, you're going to have to submit Form ADVC to the SEC. And it is going to be needed to be amended frequently as the investigation unfolds. There's a major difference between being breached and actually losing client data, right? And not every breach is successfully losing client data. So, this is the Form ADV is going to be what you update frequently as you kind of work through that post breach analysis to figure out what was lost. And so, the wording is you must report all instances that affect operations and confidentiality of data. So, again, that's kind of loose interpretation, but something definitely to be mindful of. So record keeping, the things, so these are all records for 5 years. That's going to be all versions of the PMP document, your policies and procedures document, your annual review documentation. So for most of my clients, they're just tucking their annual cybersecurity review in with their annual compliance review that they're doing. All documentation related to audits and pen test, right? So doing this stuff, if you're doing it annually, making sure you're separating those into different folders. Regulatory filings related to cyber incidences. Of course, anything we have to send to the SEC, we want to keep copies of, and of course, any cyber incident reports. The written risk and threat assessment report. So this is a report, especially if you go through that security and compliance document, this is one that we see requested over and over, where they want to see where a firm has taken a step back and say, hey, this is where we have client data, this is where we could potentially lose it, or if you have custody, this is where we have client funds, this is how we could potentially lose it. Any cyber insurance policies, again, kind of, we've had other webinar topics on that. I know some firms choose not to buy these policies, and if you understand my stance on them, I can't blame them at all. But if you do have a policy, and I do suggest that you do, your conversations with the SEC, will go over much easier if you have a cyber insurance policy in place, whether it'll actually cover you in a breach or not. Without the question, your examination will go faster with having a cyber insurance policy. It's just the way it is. And of course, any board approval on the cyber docs, they want to see those for 5 years. Okay. So that's a lot, right? Like those are going to be big changes for a lot of people in their operations. I think not only are their compliance operations going to change in terms of what documentation are they building and how are they storing it, but of course, operationally, things are going to change. And who's going to be in charge of those operations? How do you document those operations? So on and so forth. So I'll give you a little insight and just show you a few screenshots of the things that I use with my clients. And like I said, I've done this for a lot and a lot of clients and done a lot of audits. So I suggest, the things that I do suggest, I think will work with any firm. They're very versatile. I use them to walk into firms when I act as a consultant. So kind of the two biggest products that I use, and sometimes we have to add a little bit more, but the two that I start with, that help me do these audits is one called Maltego, which Maltego is almost like mind mapping software for IT nerds and compliance nerds. So I'll show you some slides of that here in a minute. And then Nessus. And Nessus is a program that we can deploy in pretty much any IT infrastructure and do the vulnerability scans and the compliance audit reports that we need, whether they be external networks, external domains, internal networks, cloud infrastructure. Nessus is extremely effective in putting together, a full scanning center for a firm. So, those prices there are pretty accurate, $1,000 a year for a Maltego license and close to $5,000 for a Nessus license. So now you see the secret to my business. All I have to do is offer services cheaper than that, and it's pretty much a win for everyone, right? So, I always tell my clients, hey, if you're doing this stuff currently and you have something that works better than Nessus and Maltego, I pay full retail for this stuff. So if you've got a better solution, please let me know what's working for you guys. But yeah, and and it's expensive. There's nothing about this regulation that's going to be cheap for firms, and this is unfortunately a part of it. But for me, these are two very effective tools in building out an entire cyber operations program. So what do we do with these two tools? Okay, here we have, it's a kind of a simple graph that I use in some of my sales materials, but it's pretty representative of what we're trying to build operationally. Okay, so if you think of an intranet, this would be if you have like an office for your firm. Inside your office, you're going to have employees who are using workstations that are connected to a router and a firewall, which takes them out to the internet so that they can connect with your custodian, do financial planning software, risk management software, whatever they may be accessing. Remote offices are big now, so I probably need to change this up and just put remote employees here post-COVID. But those are also a consideration. If we have employees that are working from home, we want to make sure they're doing so in a secure fashion. And of course, other items that you're going to have: websites, email servers, cloud deployments. A lot of firms have moved data to the cloud. So this is kind of an overview of what we're trying to do. So if you can think about in the real world, what we want to do is take Maltego and build a real world map, kind of like this. And then within Maltego, we want to make sure that we're doing our configuration audits, our network scans, our vulnerability assessments, our penetration tests, and building it out so that we can show we understand, what our network looks like and how we're going to protect it. For me, that means, we kind of, like I said, we use this in our sales graphic, but for us, that's doing an external penetration test. So, hey, can we pivot into the network from here in the office? And also doing an internal penetration test. So, we cheat a little bit and have our clients plug in a device in their office. so that we can see, what does it look like internally? Is everything secure, patch, updated? What vulnerabilities may be on the systems? But ultimately, that's what we're trying to do. And then, of course, there's a social engineering aspect of it. Like I said, I think doing employee training and teaching them about phishing and how to look for, malicious URLs is important. So we call that the social engineering aspect. But for the most part, that's how we build these operations and what we're looking at. So here is a quick overview of what the Maltego looks like. Okay, so ultimately we would run our operations. We could log into Maltego and see this. And I'm going to zoom in and show you some examples of what these dots kind of looks like a colorblind test or something. But ultimately, there would be in the real world, there'll be a dot up here at the top. Let's call it ABC Financial Firm. And then these dots here at the top would branch down from that. And these dots would represent your external domains, your internal networks, any employees working from home, that sort of thing. And what we do is under each device, when we scan them, we'll make these little nodes. It just talks about what systems, services, software, what vulnerabilities were found on these systems, that sort of thing. So this becomes our large network map that we build for clients. In it, we're doing our network mapping, our IT checklist, patch management. We're really managing our entire program within this software. So here's a quick zoom in. And you can see this is off a secure.velafor.com domain, which is a fictitious IRA we use to show. And then below that, you can see the different ports and services and systems and database that are running on that particular domain. Here's also kind of a quick idea of how we use Maltego. Kind of at the top here, you can see here's Dunder Mifflin, like we talked about ABC Financial a second ago. Dunder Mifflin has a branch in Scranton. And then on that branch, there are two systems. One is scander.dundermifflin.local, and the other one is pam.dundermifflin.local. And you can see the little time bomb here. We show where we found a vulnerability on Pam's system. So now within Maltego, once we find a vulnerability, we can use it as our central location to communicate with executives so that everyone can log in, see this database. We know what vulnerabilities are there, what we're having to deal with, and we can assign responsibility to it. Here's what our internal vulnerability management chart looks like. So, this also will be used to coordinate with executives to fix our vulnerabilities. Again, we have each host and a list of the different vulnerabilities that are ongoing. At the top, we have it listed by host here. At the top, you can click on it by vulnerability to see what the actual vulnerabilities are. And of course, what remediations need to take place. So this is how we kind of organize that vulnerability management part of it and make sure that we're communicating with the executive team. So this is Nessus here, what you're seeing now, and how that software is deployed. Nessus, I think a lot of people, especially when we have people come in and talk to us, I think a lot of people had the impression that moving to the cloud meant that, their hands were washed of things and they didn't really have much to do. But really it just adds more to the compliance work, because now what we need to do is take your cloud deployments and measure them against a known benchmark. So, looking at a different benchmark for, if we're looking at AWS or Salesforce or Microsoft Office 365, whatever that cloud deployment may be, going and looking at what are the best practices for securing that particular cloud, and then coming back through and measuring, your actual deployment and seeing what may need to change. For instance, you may have people who don't have two-factor authentication in place, right? Like, we want to sort that out and make sure that we get it solved. Again, that's a Nessus scan right there that you're seeing of an Amazon AWS. And so, we kind of briefly talked about earlier user access rights. This is a big one. The SEC wants to see how you're breaking this up. So this is a quick kind of breakdown. So within Maltego, if you click on any entity, it'll bring up this detail view. You can have all kinds of different information that you want to keep in there. So it's really easy to use Maltego for user access, right? It's because we kind of looked at where we're mapping our entire domain already in Maltego. And here we can take John Doe and show where he has admin access to a particular domain. We can collect all of our information, training reports, whatever we need. We can upload them into his record. So, it's, again, it's not saying that you have to do all this stuff if you have Maltego. We're really kind of describing the perfect situation and, the things that we do for our clients because we think it works. But overall, if you're not managing user access right, and then, we've even shown in webinars before just using an Excel sheet and how to organize an Excel sheet to show your user access rights. Totally fine. If you want to keep using an Excel, nothing wrong with that. But, for us, having Maltego in place allows us to build this for our clients. I should say, one of the great things about Maltego, even though the version that we use to build all this is $1,000 a month, they do have a free version that you can download and interact with the graph and, zoom in and out and that sort of thing. So I should have mentioned that earlier. That's another reason I really like Maltego, because when we build it for our clients, we can turn it over to them and they can interact with it just like we are, produce PDFs from it, produce Excel spreadsheets, whatever they need to do with that particular deployment. I love doing risk and threat assessment reports. We use Maltego to do that and recommend our clients do it, so for instance, one of the things that when we're looking at the risk and threat assessment reports, we want to know what information is already out there into the public. So if a hacker decides they're coming after us, what information is out there that they can already, put together and use in their knowledge to attack us. So here at the top, we took an example, john.doe@gmail.com. So that's been anonymized. The rest of the graph is actually a copy and paste from one of my clients. But essentially the top dot there, oh, my mouse went out, let me jump over here. The top dot here is going to be a particular email address. And what we do is we'll go and search the dark web. We search different breach repositories, different databases that we built. And we want to know if that email address has been involved in any of these breaches that are public. And then down below that, we map the information that we were able to collect from the breach and also give you a little note about the breach. So we want to know if dates of birth and driver's licenses and social security numbers and password hints and historical passwords, usernames, passwords, IP addresses. Often we see credit reports. We want to know if this information is out there about our employees because it will certainly be used against them. For instance, if I'm a hacker and I'm trying to attack John Doe here, I can see that he was involved in the Audi USA breach that happened in 2019. I've got a copy of his driver's license from that and a copy of his social security number. And maybe I'm going to use some of that information to try to phish him. Maybe I'm going to send him a link to a used Audi that is of a good price and get him to click on it, right? So all this information can be used against us. I always tell my clients the biggest takeaway from when we do these risk and threat assessment reports is the importance of having sophisticated, unique passwords for each service and having two-factor authentication in place, because when you have those two things, we really don't have to worry too much about passwords that have been lost. As a hacker, I can come and look at John Doe and I can see, his password history and that sort of thing. Again, it just gives me more insights into probably the password that he's using in the custodian or how he formats his password, that sort of thing. So again, I kind of zoomed in on a couple of these dots and you can see how they all come together. When we put this into a full database, it becomes pretty cool because we can easily move around the network. We can easily see all systems are updated and patched. It's easy to update this when we do our annual audits, and it's easy to save instances of this so that we can show our record keeping. For me and my clients, and through the years of doing it, this is what we have found to be the most efficient way to deploy cybersecurity operations that, one, secure the network, and two, make sure that it's easy to respond to the SEC if you get an examination notice. It's, again, I love to hear from anyone who has different ways of doing it or might be using different software, and understanding, how they're putting it together, and whatever we can learn, we'll always come back and share as a community. But anyway, just a couple ideas there about how we put this together and why we think it's important to compile it like this. Keeps jumping back on me there. We'll go one forward here. I think that's it. That's all I got for you guys today. I know we kind of briefly skipped over a lot of topics. A lot of these topics I'm going to cover in depth in our YouTube page. So definitely check that out, and you can dive into the topics that are most interesting. I am going to have a recording of this, like I said, that I'll pass around. So you look for that probably within the next day or so. And I can also make slides of this. I have a couple questions here of people asking for copies of this slide, so I can definitely get those to you. I generally don't publish those, just in kind of our workflow, but if you want to reach out to me, and I'd be happy to slide you a PDF if you need it. Let me look through some of these other questions here. How does a vendor's incident affect our requirement to file a ADVC? That's a great question, and I'll start that with, for one, I'm not an attorney, but my understanding is a vendor's breach is going to be your breach, especially if it's a vendor that you hired specifically, of course, like we had the Redtail breach a few years back, Redtail CRM. Obviously, that's a vendor that you would have hired and selected to put your client's data and sensitive information into. So my understanding is an incident like that would require you to file Form ADVC, and your attorney may say something different. So I think in the next 3 to 4 weeks, we'll have an announcement. We're going to start working with an attorney, because really prior to 20649, there wasn't a lot of regulatory filings, and that's just it's not something I enjoy doing. And like I said, not being an attorney, I don't want to give too much information on that. But from my understanding, yes, a vendor's incident is going to require notification on that. So maybe the final wording could be wrong. And if anyone, I know there's a couple of attorneys in the audience right now, if anyone knows different, please chime in, and I'd be happy to share that. And that's it. That's all the questions I have in there, guys. I hope that was helpful. If you would like to chat about anything with your program, please feel free to reach out. My information's in the bottom right-hand corner there. You can also get it on our website or through our YouTube channel. But definitely log on, take a look around, see if there's any information there that you can use to help build out your firm and meet these regulations. And of course, if not, reach out. We're certainly happy to help and have that conversation. So again, everyone, thank you so much for joining. I really appreciate everyone coming out and listening to my ideas and what we have to share. And of course, again, if there's anything you can add, please feel free to reach out. As well as if you have any suggestions on future topics that you'd like to see. Certainly happy to address them. All right, thanks, guys. Hope everyone has a great day.